So, I'm a 19-year-old college student with no kids, and it looks like I'm here today to lecture you on the importance of raising kids properly. That seems a bit ironic to me, but here I am. So my name is Patrick Lee. I am a biochemistry and neuroscience dual major at Syracuse University, and I've been researching how media violence can impact the neurobiology of a developing child. Now, show of hands, who wants to see a whole bunch of negative information about how television, movies negatively impacts a child's brain, all with a sense of hopelessness? No solution. Who wants to see that? Anybody? No? Perfect. I'm not just here to argue that something can negatively impact a child. I'm here to argue that there are solutions to this problem. Even before I discuss details, I believe that you can help your child first by not showing them Game of Thrones at the age of 2. So it's first necessary for me to define in what context I will be discussing media today. There are many forms of media. There's social media, there's movies, television, video games, but my primary focus will be media presented through television, specifically TV shows, news, and movies. Video game violence is a very popular topic in research, especially in how it shapes your child neurobiologically, but that really wasn't my focus. And there's a strong difference in video games because a child can take part in the violence, whereas in movies and television shows, a child's just observing. So I wanted to see how the observation can still change a child's brain. So I want to discuss some basic brain structures and lay down some neuroscience fundamentals. The brain takes in information through your senses, through your eyes, ears, nose, mouth, whatever else. All these inputs are going through your brain. And your brain is basically a relay station for messages. It's taking in these sensory messages, and then it's doing an output. It's saying, how do you react to things? I need to walk forward. I need to walk backwards. I need to turn my head. I need to pay attention to this. I need to learn how to react. So that's what the brain is responsible for. Looking from a micro perspective, the main cells that compose the brain are called neurons. So these neurons have a very specific shape, and this shape kind of dictates and is dictated by their function. So the function is to take messages and then send messages on in a chain along a pathway. So if we look at the structure of a neuron, we have dendrites on the left here, and these dendrites are what take in the message. Then we have the cell body, the axon terminals. So the dendrites take in the message and decide whether or not that message is important enough, is strong enough to travel to the next neuron. So if it decides that the message is strong enough, that message is going to go along the axon, go to the axon terminals, and it's going to release vesicles that have neurotransmitters in them to the next neuron. So from dendrites to axon terminals, then the axon terminals will release the neurotransmitters, which will have a similar effect on the next axon. And if this message is strong enough, then it gets sent along a pathway, and something happens in the brain as a result of this. Now that we have discussed the basics of the micro portion of the brain, we can move on to something a bit more macro. So there are 4 main lobes that roughly separate the important neural functions. The occipital lobe works with vision, the temporal lobe works with hearing, the parietal lobe works with attention and sensation, and the frontal lobe works with motor skills and higher functioning. The cerebellum listed in the image also provides motor control. The pons helps to relay signals within the brain, and the medulla oblongata regulates involuntary functions such as breathing and heart rate. We will talk in much more detail about the structures in the right picture that detail the limbic system. Basically, these structures regulate memory and emotion. So substantial to my argument that media violence has a negative impact on children and can have a negative impact long-term on children is this concept of neuroplasticity. Now this is a more modern topic. It's fairly recent, but it's very important in how our brain learns and how our brain works. So it's a very important and fundamental aspect of neuroscience. So over time, the brain gets signals and neurons change to kind of become adapted to each other. So if you have one neuron that's constantly getting a signal from the previous neuron, and it's constantly sending the signal to the next neuron, that neuron's going to adjust. It's going to adjust its shape so that it can carry out the function of sending that signal consecutively. So it's going to become more sensitive to the signal. It's going to be easier to send the signal because the signal is common with this neuron. The same thing is true if that neuron isn't getting a signal. If the neuron's not getting a signal, it's going to be almost harder for the neuron to fire a signal because it's not used to it. And this is constantly happening in our brain. If we look at a child's brain, when a child is born, each neuron has about 7,500 connections with other neurons. By the time the child reaches 2 years of age, the connections of an individual neuron are double that of the average adult brain. So by the time the child is 2 years old, its number of neural connections for each neuron is double that of an adult. So obviously this is a very crucial period in the time of learning and development for a child, because they have so many neural connections, they can learn and develop their brains very quickly. One more important part of neuroscience must be discussed: the structures we care about for our purposes. So if brain structure are looked at from a macro perspective, we can see individual structures that play a role in specific functions. The reticular system, shown in this image, is involved in arousal, anxiety, and control of limbic and cortical processing. Basically, you aren't thinking about the position of your left foot until I mention it, because your reticular activating system blocks your brain and lets it instead focus on what you are thinking about. If you're a good and attentive listener, you are thinking about my awesome presentation. If not, you are probably thinking of food. I'm thinking about food. Anyway, so the next important brain region for our interest is the locus coeruleus. And if you see this image, it's a little red dot in the lower left corner here. So this is part of the reticular activating system, and it is involved in generating and sending norepinephrine to various parts of the brain and body. This is important because norepinephrine is implicated in things such as an increased heart rate and a flight or fight response. That's a tongue twister. The hippocampus, our next structure, is essential for storing declarative memory, or memory for facts about the world. If you look at this image, you can see that the amygdala is a structure very, very close to the hippocampus. So they're spatially proximal to each other. So the amygdala is important for our memory of scary events or things we fear. Memories, things you fear or things that scared you, or things that strongly had an emotional impact on you, you can remember in more detail. So our last structure of interest here is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, commonly called the HPA axis because that's way too much to say. So this HPA axis regulates threat, fear, and feat. Chronic activation of the system can result in chronic stress, which can cause hippocampal damage and impaired glucose utilization. So violence is scattered throughout television programs that children take in. It's present in the form of cartoon animation. It's present in the form of Game of Thrones, if your child is for whatever reason watching that at a young age. And studies indicate that by the time children are 18 years old, they will have witnessed around 200,000 violent acts on television. Around this time period, when a child is between 11 and 12 years old, a peak arises in the volume of the frontal lobe. Neuroimaging has revealed that this peak is important in regions pertaining to organization, planning, behavior control, and attention. Around this time, a child can form habits easier. For example, addiction around this age is a huge issue because the child's brain is very quick to adapt and it gets used to something very quickly. So how can a child negatively be long-term affected by this? I stated earlier the concept of neuroplasticity. A child's brain is always changing. Everybody's brain is always changing. But a child is doing so at a longer rate. With that said, children also have a very large imagination. It's hard for children at a young age to separate fact from fiction. So if a child can't separate fact from fiction, as well as an adult can, and their brain is changing at a very quick pace, they're going to kind of have a lot of biological responses to killings, or things they may think, oh, this looks kind of wrong. And their brain's not going to get used to it, it's going to be desensitized. And in the long term, this could be implicated in things like mental illness, especially with the rise of news, the way information spreads easier, the relevance of mass shootings in today's society. Children will become desensitized to this, and it could develop depression, anxiety, an increased stress response could possibly cause things like bipolar disorder, maybe even schizophrenia. These are real negative long-term impacts that a child can have. Now you may be asking yourselves, is there an argument against the idea that media violence has a negative impact on a developing child? The answer is yes. So this individual named Jar Jones is a popular comic book writer, and he argues that violence can be useful in the development of a child. He thinks gore descriptions, violence in comic books can help a child learn coping mechanisms. He said this helped him as a child to learn effective coping mechanisms. It helped him to learn to stand out, be himself, be unique, blah, blah, blah. So, and this kind of makes sense, because we allow our kids to go out and experience the world. You know, if they fall down, they trip over a stick, they learn to look where they're walking so they don't trip over a stick. It's a common argument. Worth noting in this argument, in 2018, Jar Jones was sentenced to 6 years of imprisonment for possession of child pornography. So this really destroys his credibility on the topic. He argues that, violence in comic books and things like that are good for child. It's going to help them develop properly. He was arrested for child pornography. He didn't really develop too properly if those were his, since he's guilty of this. His credibility destroyed. There's no other really significant evidence scientifically to argue that media violence is good for a child. Jones argues that a child has natural rage, that comic books can kind of mask, teach them to overcome. Science doesn't necessarily agree with this. We believe in the data we find. We believe in the neuroimaging results we find. There's no proof to specifically say violence has positively impacted a person. No significant research studies published yet. And it's definitely something that science is going to continue to look at. Because a lot of the ideas aren't necessarily, they make sense. But we haven't found anything yet. So now, I gave you all the negativity. Who's ready to hear some positive things? Yeah? Good, lots of hands. That's what I like to see. So, this isn't set in stone. And there's ways you can help your children so that they don't have negative long-term implications, they don't have this possible increased risk for mental illness, they don't have an increased stress response regularly, and quite simply, play with your children. Spend time with them. Limit their screen time. The American Pediatric Association has guidelines online for screen time that is believed to be okay for a child. The less screen time, especially between the ages of birth and 5, the better. Children should get used to this. As Dmitry Christakis said in another TED Talk, children between the ages of birth and 5 years old have an increased risk of attention deficit disorders due to television programs that have fast scene changes. And this is something we don't really necessarily think about a lot, but there's a lot of quick scene changes in television shows, in movies. If you're sitting on the couch and watching a movie, and your child's there, and you think, oh, the child's not really taking in the media, you don't necessarily know that, because a child's brain functions differently. A child's brain is going to look at something that changes quickly and say, this is how the world works. Things change quickly. You're going from here to here to over here. And the brain's going to adjust to this. That's not good for a child. A child shouldn't get used to something unrealistic in their world. Now, obviously, imagination is very important to children. So, how do you find this right balance? First, I recommend not making the programs violent. Educational screen time is really the only screen time a child should get between ages of birth and 5 years old. You don't really want to be showing them entertainment TV shows, educational shows, and educational content. is okay, especially if the child is actively engaged in that content, but they should get used to it. So it's important at this age to just experience the world with your child. Take them on walks, take them on hikes, let them experience what's around them. Don't give them something unrealistic in the form of television, in the form of media, in the form of violence, or news. You don't want to desensitize them at such an early age. Now, is that to say a 15-year-old can't go and watch a movie? Is that to say one PG-13 movie is going to destroy the life of a 10-year-old? No. Especially once a child gets older, even in the early adolescent years, it probably isn't harmful for them to go watch an action movie. It probably isn't harmful for them to go to, be interested in the Avengers. But what would be harmful to them is if they're watching the Avengers constantly, throughout the whole day. Limiting screen time is important. And it can be argued, potentially, that minimal screen time and imagination for somebody in the early adolescent years is important. This is something neurocentrally hasn't specifically looked into. My research today didn't really look into it. But it can be hypothesized that limited screen time, depending on what is being shown, at what age the child is, could be beneficial for the imagination and creative development of the child. It's something science, as far as I know, hasn't looked into, but it could be potentially useful. So it's definitely something to think of. So in conclusion, parents should be cognizant of the media that their child is taking in. It's important that your child neurologically develops properly, and that they have these neural connections from their experience in the world. Children need to go out and experience what the world is like. And it is essential for the parents to be with them for this, so that the child has proper connection with love, proper connection with the parents, and this will help the child develop positively in the long term. So thank you for your time, and thank you for being such a great audience. Everybody have a great day.